Hello, my name is Josiah Mugambi. I am a technologist and entrepreneur. I currently have found myself involved in multiple startup and technology support initiatives over the last 10 or so years. I'm also interested in music. I've spent a bit of time playing in a band, singing while I was a bit younger, and I like the intersection of music and technology and what that means in this digital world, and I hope to share some of my experiences with you.
Even with a good contract, there can be still some disputes, and that's why a good contract has a dispute resolution clause. As an artist, I would like to be able to resolve my disputes fast in an efficient way without necessarily attracting bad press, and also in a timely and cost-effective way. In dispute resolution, ADR actually means alternative dispute resolution. An alternative to what, you may be thinking? An alternative to litigation, an alternative to the court system, an alternative to solving disputes in an adversarial way. I'll start with the most common form, which is mediation. And mediation simply means bringing in a neutral third party so that this person can hear our side, both of the sides of the story or the dispute, and try to get us to reach a settlement. Another food for thought is also that maybe artists can also train as mediators and as arbitrators and get into bodies, lobby for bodies that are driven by artists to be the dispute resolution bodies. They are then comfortable to have the expertise to handle the disputes and people who are knowledgeable in the music industry, so to speak. Lastly, we have to think of maybe some of the disputes do not need to get to the dispute point if we actually get into agreements beforehand.
The creation process has to have that nice energy around it.
Exactly.
So if you don't have that nice energy, so what would you advise if you're sitting as a licensed mediator, arbitrator? What would your advice for an artist be, where mediation and arbitration is concerned, knowing what the artist process is?
Obviously, you want to save on costs, you want to save on time, and you want to keep the relationship flowing. So I would always start a good dispute resolution clause. Thankfully, Kavere had taken us through the contract webinar last week. So one of the key things in a good contract is a dispute resolution clause.
This week, we are going to talk about data privacy and protection for Mpumi. Remember, Mpumi is an aspiring musician. She has found a new producer and she wants to delve into the whole digital music world and wants to learn how she can protect herself, protect her fans. And so let's talk about data privacy. What is data privacy? It's concerned about protecting information to do with a user, their content, their personal information, how it's stored, how it's shared, whether it's shared with the right people or not. And some of the things you need to think about there are the sort of contracts you get into, the sort of regulations you get into, and then the third parties that get involved when it comes to data sharing. Because when you talk about the digital world, there's a lot of data involved. At the end of the day, privacy is about an individual's right to freedom and how that information about themselves is shared. What about data security? Or in some instances, information security? It's to do with preventing information from being shared in an unauthorized manner with third parties and protecting yourselves. Everyone knows about hackers and people who go out of their way to steal information. But when it comes to personal data, somebody could actually steal your information and impersonate you, and you can find yourself in all sorts of problems. Or you could find yourself on the other side being accused of sharing information, even if you had no idea about that. And so when you think about data security and privacy, you think of a window and a curtain. Your data privacy is like a curtain, but a curtain doesn't prevent a thief from entering your house. You need a window or a door. So you think of having both data privacy and data security as key things to think about when you're talking about the online world and the digital world. Of course, not all information is digital. So when you think about data security, we actually can extend it to information security. So what is data protection, especially in the musical world? Keep in mind that everything in the online or the digital world is data. So your music, but also your fans' personal information is all data. So when you combine your data privacy and data security, you get data protection. And you want to be able to protect unauthorized access, or rather prevent unauthorized access to music or to user information or to personal information. And one of the ways you do that is through digital rights management. A lot of the online platforms, for example, iTunes or Apple One, as it's called nowadays, implements some digital rights management or DRM encryption, where they make it very difficult for unauthorized users to access that music or to use that music. So you essentially need to purchase that music in order to use it. There are both advantages and disadvantages of that, but by and large, it's one of the ways that a musician has to protect their rights to their music. Some of the rules and regulations that govern how data is protected across the world include the Gdpr, which originated from the EU, but also governs data that is captured by platforms across the world, as long as it affects an EU citizen. We have the Data Protection Act that was passed in Kenya in 2019, but has run into some headwinds in Senate recently. But across the world, there's various rules, regulations that govern how data is protected. So why does data protection matter to a musician? Third parties, we talked about third parties, could be platforms that are used to distribute music, to promote music, to connect with musicians, connect with fans, to run concerts, to organize concerts, and they heavily rely on the collection of data, and that data needs to be protected and shared and used in a responsible way. Some of those platforms include YouTube, Spotify, Deezer, Dundo, to cite a more local example, and it could also include your own personal website for your own music. As long as you're collecting data, you need to conform to some of those rules and regulations. So as a musician, it's important to be aware of this. How is this data collected on the internet? We might have seen what they call cookies. It's not a snack that you have for coffee or tea, with your coffee or tea, but it's essentially text files that collect pieces of information such as your name and password, email, and how you browse, which sites you visit, how long you are there. And some of this information can be used to uniquely identify you on the internet. Cookies are essentially a core part of the internet. It's almost impossible to browse the internet without encountering or using cookies, but they also present a vulnerability or a point of risk for when it comes to data being shared. And many legitimate platforms now are forced to present information about their cookie policy or how they collect data in a manner that is easy to understand, and a user usually has the option to opt in or opt out based on their preferences. Apart from cookies, it's good to be aware of what the platform you're using subscribes to in terms of a privacy policy. A privacy policy essentially talks about what the site does with your data, who it shares it with, how it protects it, what rights you have in terms of access to it, deleting it. And many platforms allow you to delete or to opt out or opt in to different bits and pieces of data. Some sites don't allow you to do that, but many sites often give you that opportunity. So in the case of Deezer, it has a clear privacy policy. It's in clear English. Anyone can go and read through it. You don't actually need to be a lawyer to understand what it collects. Some of the parts of that privacy policy include the sort of clearly indicating what sorts of private data that is collected, how they use that private personal data, how it's shared and with who it's shared with, how it's protected, how long it's kept, and what rights you have to that data. Many privacy policies also include information on how that data is used. It could be used to improve the service, to actually offer the service. For example, in the case of music, it makes it easy for some of your fans to learn about you as a musician if a similar artist, they already listen to a similar artist, and the data and the insights that are derived from that data as provided by the platform point to me as a potential favorite of these users. Information on how data is shared is also important. Things to do with how that information is shared with regulators, with governments, with technology providers, with partners, with third-party solution providers, with payment providers. There has to be a clear indication of how that's shared in what instances and what measures are taken to protect data. When it comes to data protection, which is critical, it's important to note that there's no such thing as 100% protection, but there are reasonable measures that any platform should take. So there has to be a clear indication of security measures that are taken to protect data. Technically, how information is restricted in terms of who can access it, from the employee perspective of that platform, or which third parties can access that platform's data, and what compliance measures are in place. So how would you implement this as a musician, given that your core business or your core purpose is not necessarily technology or some of these legal things? There's some basic things you could do. You could spend time reading before clicking, so looking and seeing that there's actually a policy in place, there are cookies in place. If you're building your own website, which many artists do, it's even more important to take measures, because if for some reason a fan accuses you of sharing information illegally or without permission, it could land into all sorts of problems. In summary, how do you protect yourselves in this digitally driven online world where music is distributed digitally? I would say think and read. Make sure you read carefully what you're signing up for online. Think carefully before clicking or uploading your music or sharing your music. Be very careful with your data. Be careful with your fans' data or your audience data in how it's shared. And lastly, when all is said and done, it's also always a good idea to get a professional to help you implement these policies. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for staying till the end. This is week 4 session on data protection, privacy. Josiah, is it data or data? Or
depends
data?
On which school you went to, which part of the country you come from, or the continent. It's really about data Any can go.
Okay. And really, I think after money, the next valuable thing is data. So let's talk about it. We are now taking your questions. We'll be answering. Keep them coming in. Okay, I see a question here from Felix Kimanthi. And he's, since we'll keep saying data. Since Data Protection Act is blocked by senators in Kenya, can a Kenyan use GDPR to protect themselves? And if possible, how to do it? So perhaps you can just, generally speaking, tell the audience that may not know what GDPR is, what the Data Protection Act is, just simply, what are they? So that why is a Kenyan availing to themselves the GDPR and not the other one? And then lastly, of the implementation of that act as we speak.
Okay, so the Data Protection Act was passed, I think, some time ago. I think it's 2019. I think it ran into some headwinds, as I said earlier, that essentially Senate wants to have a say in how it's been implemented, but I think a stay was granted on the Act. So as far as active, a data commission has been appointed because that's part of the Act. And also, it's coming. This idea of regulating how data is used, how people's data is protected, that's coming. The EU or the EU Economic Area have what we call the GDPR, General Data Protection, I think, regulation, something to that effect. And it any data that pertains to any EU citizen is used. So as a musician, you're trying to get to a global audience. So you're not just targeting Kenyans, it's the entire globe if you want to. So if any EU citizen, you collect any information to do with any EU citizen, by default, you're part of, you have to comply with the GDPR. And I think the most progressive, if you like, data protection regulations across the world. So I would say it's wise to think about how you can comply with it. Of course, is hugely technical in terms of you need expertise, legal or otherwise to comply. But it's important because data is, as my colleague said earlier, it's the new money, if you like, or it's the new oil. People are minting money from data. So it's good to be at the forefront of that.
So if your content transcends Kenya, if you're collecting information from your fans who are citizens of the EU, then it's not a question of whether you should comply or not. You should comply with the GDPR. There's an anonymous attendee who is asking whether they should decline cookies. And I think you should take that question together with another one here. Cookies, for example, on Facebook, help protect my data.
So it makes sense to first understand what cookies are. They are essentially small text files on your computer. Each time you go onto a website, most websites will ask you, will automatically have the browser save small text files on your computer, and the website understand what sort of, say, internet browser you're using and what sort of computer, if it's a computer or a mobile phone. Basically, it's information that allows the provided. So on one hand, it's very useful information for the person providing the service by the website. On the other hand, some of that information can be exploited if it's not taken care of well.
What kind of information do cookies collect?
So as I said, where you're browsing from. So if you're using, say, Zuku in Kenya, for example, if you're somewhere in the US, there's some information around how you're accessing the website, what sort of internet browser, are you using Windows, are you using a Mac, are you using a system, are you using an iOS or an Apple phone? Even sometimes you can actually tell roughly based on different aspects your location. So if it's a phone with a GPS on, roughly where you are. So that's a lot of information for some people, possibly too much for in some cases.
But it can be a good thing.
It's a good thing because sometimes you need to, if say you're where your users are listening your music from. So your music is on Spotify or on Bandcamp or on Apple One. How would you know where your users are listening from? Especially if it's subscription, for example. Say somebody's listening on YouTube, and they haven't signed on to YouTube, so there's no way of knowing that this guy is in Kenya or in Nigeria. That information is useful because it allows you to customize the service for that particular user, but also can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Some information can be dangerous in the wrong hands.
So you're going to sit on the fence for this one? Or you're going to say allow cookies or disable cookies?
In there with your eyes open. Yeah.
Okay. I guess this is also related to that. Does going incognito and switching off my location protect my private being collected by unscrupulous companies?
I'm speaking as somebody who has some of those things in place. I regularly use a browser that allows you to go in some. I don't want to get too technical, but there's a way you can even prevent the browser or the internet service provider from knowing exactly where you are. So the way it works with the once you close the browser, all your cookies are deleted. They're not saved on your computer. So it enhances your privacy. It's not 100%, of course, but it definitely enhances your privacy. And that means when you go back to that specific website, it will treat you as if you have not been there before. So you probably have to accept cookies again and all that.
Okay.
I sort of hope that answers that question.
Be using Ghostery and other blocking tools on websites?
I'll say a lot of the internet runs on advertisements. Say, for example, the likes of Google. There's this internet ads on Facebook, for example, or a lot of websites depend on advertising revenue, and a lot of those advertisements are served based on and such tracking technology, if you like. So blocking it sometimes means that that whole economic model might collapse one day. Most people don't block, to be honest, so probably not in a hurry, but it's one of those tools that to protect you. It's one of the many things you could do in case you want to protect yourself more, you can use some of those tools. Yeah, so it definitely would help.
Okay. Another question here. Is it illegal to use a VPN to access things like Spotify when they are not available here? I have my music there and I want people to access it.
That's a gray area, to be honest.
First of all, what is a VPN? A
VPN is a virtual private network. So it's essentially you could connect your computer in Kenya or wherever you are. Get sort of like a pipe, or think of it as like a direct line, and makes it appear as if you're in, say, the US or Europe or China, wherever you want to be. And then it treats you as if accessing Spotify treats you as if you are part of that country. Mm-hmm. I'm saying it's a gray area because some jurisdictions are okay with it, some places I think are not okay with it. It's more of a copyright. The reason why say have some content not available in Kenya or not available in some countries and available in other countries is really about how the distribution rights have been done for, say, music or many cases, movies. As far as I know, it's many people treat it like a gray area. Sometimes it's completely illegal. Sometimes it's not. Yeah.
Okay. How do I ensure that companies do not use my private social media data to deny me a concert? I'm not sure. I think the person needs to clarify that question. Talks about big data as the next frontier. GDPR says data should be accurate and used for what it was collected for. If a consumer clicks yes on my website, can I use the data for voted to because a musician's career is always evolving, or do I have to inform the consumers of the change? If you allow me to take this, if you look the GDPR and also the Data Protection Act, the Kenyan one, when you're collecting data from subjects, you have to be very clear, first of all, what you're collecting, and how long you're going to have it, and to what use are you going to put it to. If you're going to put this data in the hands of processors, controllers, then you need to also state that you're going to do that. And then you're supposed to give the subject room to consent to all those things being done. And if you change why you collected that data in the first place, then you ought to go back so that somebody gives their consent, because the consent I gave for the initial reason, the initial purpose is not consent. If you change that, it's not consent. If I give you consent to hold my hair up, I'm not giving you consent to shave it off, if I may be drastic. Yes, so if you change why you collected the data, then you must also update the consent from the data subjects.
I'll say it's the phrase I would think about is informed. Somebody needs to know that I've agreed for this to happen. So if you change your site to that there's a drastic enough change that it will affect the user, data is being used, you need to inform the user that this is what you are doing. Do you agree? You don't agree? Opt in, opt out, and in a manner that is easy to understand, because you can of course bog the language that's friendly. It has to be easily understood. Remember, you're talking to people who are not necessarily legal practitioners or people who understand English or whatever language. It has to be easily understood and well informed.
Okay. So in your opinion, does GDPR work for the consumer or for the big data companies?
I would say it's mostly for the consumer, but in a sense also keeps the big companies in check. I think there's been, if you read up on a lot of this law, there's a lot of discussion in the technology world on how the big 5 companies, how much, and really the power they have is as a result of the data they hold. And there's a lot of push, especially in the EU, that is specific to how that data is being used and for what purposes. So it's really about protection of individual data and preventing exploitation and people benefiting from that in a unfair or almost one manner, so to speak.
Say yes, it works. It's mostly to tame the big data companies and to protect you as the data subject, because it now gives you some rights. You can say no, yes, I want, and just that right to be told why your data has been stored, whom it's going to be shared with, what it can be used to do. I think it's empowering the subject more than I don't know, bringing whatever advantage there is to the big data companies. But that's my personal opinion. Another anonymous attendee here is asking, how can using third-party companies to manage mailing lists, for example, Reverb Nation, ensure that their fans' data is safe?
So any of those platforms, Reverb Nation, or you need to understand. You also, it makes sense for you to see what they say about how they handle data. No doubt they should have a privacy policy which contains rules on whose data is collected, what data is collected, and how it's being used. That would be the basis for making a decision on whether is that data safe there, what measures are there to protect that data. So I'll say the third-party service providers should have that information available and in place. And if they don't have it, it brings some question marks around whether they are taking data privacy and data protection seriously. Yeah.
I think this is also a moment to have a contract between yourself and persons who are processing your data. I think you have to have that very clear, because the primary responsibility under the Act or the Gdpr is on you as the person who is controlling that data or having collected that data. Bring on board third parties who are going to process that or do something. You will obviously have to ensure that how they work with the data, ensures that they are complying with their, to ensure there's security and there's no manipulation and there's no leakage, and so I guess it's a contractual thing so that you protect yourself from the liability in the event that then you know who's going to bear the cost of that.
Yeah.
So if you don't, you remain the primary person who has the primary responsibility, and therefore you will pay for that. As a musician in Africa, must I comply with the GDPR? I think we had answered that.
Yeah.
Is it illegal for me to use someone else's image, e.g. a couple or a house, in my video without, I suppose it's a music video. So can you just have random people things without their permission?
That's a tricky situation because it's not yours. You don't know you may or may not know whose image it is. If it's a public figure, maybe there's a sense that you can use it, but I think it just depends on the jurisdiction that you're talking about. Then you talked about GDPR. That's information, that is potentially information that belongs to somebody under that regulatory framework, and it affects you if you use the image. I would say just play it safe, seek consent, looking for controversy to drive sales. You just get them to agree to use it. Probably safer that way.
Yes, in fact, attendee is reminding us that there was a recent case where a public figure was awarded damages because their image was used in a competition that was submitted by a photographer. And if you recall, in the first session, Wanderi Karimi took us through the basics of copyright. I think she told you that everyone has a copyright in their own image and in their likeness and in your voice, So you cannot find a pretty face and decide that that's going to be in your pictures or in your music video, or a nice couple or a nice house. So you have to seek the consent of this person before you use their copyright in your work.
Yeah.
We still have, 7 minutes? I don't know if there are any final questions.
I think that mailing list question, I think people think in terms of it has to be on a website, or it's something on one of these platforms that are quite famous, but it could be a simple document in your name. These are my funds, my name, my address, my phone number, and then you start thinking about, okay, how can I share this information with a fellow artist so that we can both benefit? That's a dicey situation. It could be as simple thing as that, but a fan might start asking themselves, okay, how did this guy get my information? And then they go to and say, this one, I think they have used my data in the wrong way. So that's a scenario where you need to be careful. It could be a very innocent way of promoting yourself, but you want the information shared.
Yes, because when I came to your website, because it was your website. And when I gave my information, my name, or I subscribed to whatever, and I gave my email address, and I was giving it to you to make use of it because you have disclosed perhaps on your website why you want that information. And part of the deal was not for you to take that. The other people who need mailing lists. I know it's a very hot topic because it's happening anyway. But what I know is that people try to share data of analytics. In this demographic, this is the reality of so and so has this number of fans in Nairobi, for example. There was a concert, and there were 50 males and 20 females. You know, that the analytics that don't really personally identify anyone. But the minute you cross over and get into personal, consent must be sought from the data subject. I don't think there are any more questions. Just to remind you that having our final webinar. Thank you so much for being patient. This is coming to an end. Tunakafunga manzi. So we are having the webinar on Tuesday next week. Please tune in at 3 o'clock. Wanderi Karimi will be taking you through digital channels for music distribution. Please tune in. We want to thank you so much for being through today and the other 4 weeks. Please feel free to email your questions, info@lacadvocates.com, or send us a DM on our socials. In case you have, please check the LAC YouTube channel for the reruns. They are there. And you can send your questions in advance on digital music distribution. Please do that. Please remember that these trainings are courtesy of Music in Africa and our very good sponsors, Goethe-Institut, and the other one that I will not pronounce, but I'm sure you will see it down below. And please note that our trainings are for information only. We are not giving you legal advice. If you have a specific situation, please contact us for specific legal advice that is tailor-made for your situation. Thank you. See you Tuesday.